Well, even when you're up in the air, they're picking your pocket on the plane. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and it's only $5, so what the heck is the big deal, right? Congressional leaders looking to double a tax on airline passengers from $2.50 a flight now to $5. Now, I'm told that's a good deal because it beats the $7.50 that President Obama wants to charge, even though it's not clear exactly where all of this money is going. Now, I'm told the $20 to $25 billion it will raise in 10 years, depending on the final tax, goes to the TSA. Another chunk could go to reducing the national debt. That's like me saying eventually I could start eating vegetables. Don't count on it. Me, I've had enough of it. All of it. The nickel and diming us, the surcharging us, the fees on top of fees for us. And we're supposed to be grateful because, well, at least income tax rates aren't touched, as everything else we touch is. If this is Washington's definition of progress on a budget, have another look at all of those spending cuts that ain't happening, folks, because I think this is Washington just spreading the sheet. Anyway, since it's not an income tax, do we just let it pass? My panel says, no, this just doesn't fly. With me now, Jamie Weinstein, Steve Ellis. All right, Jamie, to you on this. It's a small thing. Now it adds up to tens of billions of dollars and all is said and done. So let it fly. Let it fly. Let it go.
Well, if you actually look at all the taxes that are airline ticket, when you buy a ticket, it could be as much as 30% of the ticket. Let's say you had a $250 domestic flight, $50 of that or more could be a tax of some sort or a fee, as it is in this case, which is really essentially a tax on airline travelers. At the end of the day, what strikes me is that this is just so small ball. You have these two budget committee chairs coming together, and this is what they're coming up with. When we have $80 trillion in unfunded liabilities, you know, they're talking about $18 billion maybe going to pay down the debt over 10 years, $18 billion. There's a, as I said, $80 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Yeah. It's nothing.
Not even a rounding error on a rounding error. But, Steve, what amazes me is I can remember when they wanted to do transaction fee charges of, when on Wall Street, a penny in on a sale and then a penny in on a buy. And we were talking about hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of time for the government from Wall Street. So these little things add up, but we barely pay attention because we're focused on income tax rates, leave those alone, and we're not realizing we're being zoomed in another way.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it just comes down to semantics, Neil. I mean, so essentially, this isn't a fee because they're essentially taking the money and they're going to use it and spend it elsewhere. And this is really about increasing spending from what they already agreed to in the Budget Control Act. And so, that's really a tax. And, you might as well just call it as it is.
Well, in this case, it is an airline passenger tax, so they're being honest in that respect. But you're quite right to say that, maybe if you call this silk purse a sow, people will start believing that it's a silk purse and not the sow. But I gotta wonder where we're going with this, Jamie. That you gotta wonder whether this is Washington's way of saying, well, we're not going to cut spending, but we do need money, and we do need to pay for what we've got, or at least take a stab at paying for what we got. So we'll just nickel and dime them to pay for it.
Well, I think the airline focusing on is just silly. It's a way, I think, to placate the Democrats in this case, to show that you're raising taxes in some way and in a way placate some
What
Republicans.
are Republicans getting in return?
I don't think very much. And the only thing they're getting, and I'll say the only benefit of this is I'm a defense hawk. If you can get the sequester off the Defense Department, which took a disproportionate share in the sequester, that may be a good thing in the long run. But in terms of fixing our long-term fiscal picture, this does zero. It's a rounding error, as you said, and there's nothing to do there. And that's, in my mind, the greatest domestic challenge to the United States.
Steve, is it me, or are they far more creative coming up with ways of getting money than cutting money? My hat's off to them, but I mean, they save that creativity for getting our cash, not saving us cash.
Right. Well, and there's lots of places to cut in government, and it includes even in the Defense Department. There are things that are wasteful weapon systems and other issues that can be actually cut and save the money and do it in a responsible manner rather than these sort of gimmicks like this. Or also they're talking about selling wireless spectrum, and they're talking about
So why did the government, why did Republicans in particular fall like cheap suits on this, Steve? I mean, that seems to be the case.
Well, it's a good question, and essentially it seems like they're just so desperate to get anything done or some sort of deal. I think it'd be better to just extend it at the sequestration level and do it like that rather than actually doing this sort of gimmicky, very easily criticized sort of package.
But I would argue, Steve, if you keep in the sequestration levels, the problem is that Americans think that you're actually doing something, and you're not. It's still a small amount of money. You can't cut your way to fixing our $80 trillion in unfunded liability. You have to reform Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare.
But they never do that. They never do that.
But at the end of the day, if you don't do that, then nothing's really being done. Because we can pretend that sequestration is a big deal, but unless you touch the entitlement programs, nothing
well,
really
here's
is
where I
being
fold
done.
Republicans, because if you're going to talk a good game on reining this spending in, all right, so you're not going to shut the government down. That's fine. That's a good thing to try to avoid. But it seems like you've just given up the fight. Now, I'm told a lot of Republicans tell me we're just sort of keeping our powder dry for 2014 and beyond. We think we have a good shot at picking up the Senate and maybe pave the way to pick up the presidency in 2016. But that's sort of like big time rolling the dice, isn't it?
Well, not only is it big time rolling the dice, Neil, but it's sort of like, just trust us, we'll take care of it in the future. And you hear that from politicians a lot. And it's even in this case where you're talking about 10 years of offsets for a couple years or a year of spending. And so, and I completely agree with Jamie's point. I mean, we obviously have to tackle entitlements and those long-term liabilities. We absolutely have to tackle tax reform as well, and and do some cuts within the discretionary program. And yeah, the Budget Control Act, it's only going to save basically $1.2 trillion, maybe even less, over 10 years, and that's
Bottom
really
line,
kind of
it's
a drop
not
in the
moving
bucket.
the needle. And Jamie, I generally, you're another generation, you're a much younger guy, so you're the guy who's really going to be screwed in this deal. I just might skate under the fence here. But that's what really bothers you and a lot in your generation, that no one is really thinking the long-term consequences of this.
In fairness, Neil, I actually think the Republicans have tried to address this. Paul Ryan, who's in this negotiation, leading this negotiation,
he seems to have given up.
He tried, and the Democrats would stymied a deal that wasn't perfect, but would have significantly fixed and at least reformed our entitlement program. But the president didn't play ball, and neither did the Democrats. They don't want to touch Medicare or Social Security, and if you're not going to touch that, then there's no really even point in playing this game.
All right. So if you're not even able to come to an agreement on doing the little stuff, it's back to your point at the outset, Steve. They'll never be doing the big stuff at this rate.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And in this case, it's sort of like, if you're going to try to do this grander bargain and this bigger deal, it's going to take time and it's going to take structure. And this is kind of under the gun and slapdash together. They're sort of looking in the couch cushions for some spare change instead of actually taking some real solutions or causing some pain in certain parts of government where there are legitimate areas that should be cut and wasteful programs that should be eliminated. And we came out with $2 trillion worth of deficit reduction when they were trying to figure out a way out from underneath the BCA. And so, people can look at government and there's lots of places to cut.
There are ways to do it. You're absolutely right. Gentlemen, you're both right. There are ways to do it. They just don't do it. By the way, I was